My friends, the Eagles just got their first real test of the 2026 season, and even though the Patriots may have had the better overall day in Foxborough, there is a lot more to take away from this joint practice than the final impression of Philadelphia losing the majority of the session. The biggest headline is simple: Jalen Hurts and this new-look Eagles offense showed enough against a Super Bowl caliber defense to make this feel more encouraging than concerning. Yes, Jalen Hurts threw 3 interceptions. That is the number that immediately jumped out when the first reports from practice started circulating. But if you stop there, you completely miss the context of what actually happened. 2 of those interceptions were the result of drops, including a throw to Deantavian Wicks that was placed right where it needed to be. The ball went through his hands and ended up with a Patriots defender. Another mistake involved a drop from Johnny Munt, while Saquon Barkley also had a drop during the practice. There was one interception that can clearly be placed on Hurts. He overthrew a receiver along the right sideline, and a Patriot safety made the play. That is the kind of mistake Hurts will have to eliminate as this new offense develops. But the other interceptions do not tell the story of his performance, and that is why looking only at the practice statistics would be misleading. Think about the situation Hurts was dealing with. This was the first time the Eagles' first-team offense faced another team's competition this summer, and they were doing it on the road against New England. The Patriots defense is coming off a season in which the team reached Super Bowl 60, and Philadelphia was also operating a completely new offensive system under first-year offensive coordinator Sean Mannion. On top of that, Hurts did not have all of his primary weapons available to him. Devonta Smith was not there, Maki Lemon was not available, and second-round pick Eli Stowers was not yet working with the first-team offense. That means Hurts has spent much of the offseason developing chemistry with players such as Deantavian Wicks, Hollywood Brown, Elijah Moore, and Darius Cooper. That does not mean Hurts gets a free pass for every mistake. He is the franchise quarterback, and Philadelphia needs him to elevate the offense. But despite the mistakes, there were several plays that showed exactly why Eagles fans should be encouraged by what they saw. One of the biggest examples came when Hurts recognized a blitz coming directly through the A-gap. Instead of panicking, he adjusted, rolled away from the pressure, and delivered a beautiful deep pass to Will Shipley along the right sideline on a wheel route. That play could have produced a major explosive gain in an actual game, and it showed something that has become increasingly important in Hurts' development: his ability to recognize pressure and make a play when the defense brings the heat. There was another impressive 3rd and 10 situation in which the Eagles' pass protection struggled. Hurts escaped pressure outside the pocket and still managed to find Hollywood Brown for a first down conversion. Then there was the deep throw to Elijah Moore down the left sideline. Hurts drifted out of the pocket, created just enough space, and placed the ball where only Moore could realistically make a play on it, despite tight coverage from a Patriots defensive back. Those are the kinds of plays that matter when evaluating a quarterback during joint practices. They show that even without his top group of weapons, Hurts is finding ways to create explosive plays in an offense that he is still learning. And there is another part of this practice that may be even more important for Philadelphia. The running game looked much better. The Eagles' rushing attack had struggled during the preseason opener against Baltimore, but that was not the first-team offense. Against New England, the story was completely different. Reports from the Patriots side of the practice indicated that Philadelphia's run game was giving the Patriots' first-team defense serious problems, with Saquon Barkley particularly effective on outside zone concepts. That could be a major development for this offense. The identity of the Eagles is still going to be built around the offensive line, Barkley and Hurts' ability to run the football. The passing game has to improve, especially with a new scheme and new weapons, but Philadelphia does not need to abandon what has made this offense dangerous. Instead, the goal should be to make the passing game complement the physical identity of the team, and the new offensive system appears to be giving Barkley opportunities to attack defenses differently. The outside zone concepts can get him toward the boundary faster and put him into open space earlier in the play. That is exactly where Barkley becomes dangerous. Even last season, when the blocking was not always good enough to consistently get him into the 2nd and 3rd levels, there were still plenty of moments when Barkley's explosiveness was obvious. When he did find space, he remained one of the most dangerous players on the field. Now the Eagles are also looking at ways to use him in the screen game and even move him out wide as a receiver. The idea is to get the ball into Barkley's hands in space, rather than simply asking him to run into crowded areas repeatedly. That could be one of the most important elements of this new offense. The Eagles do not need to become a completely different football team overnight. They need to add new dimensions to what they already do well. If Barkley can consistently get into space, if Hurts can continue making progress against pressure, and if the passing game can become more efficient as Devonta Smith and the other weapons return, Philadelphia could have an offense that becomes increasingly difficult to defend as the season approaches. There were obviously negatives as well. The Eagles' secondary struggled at times, and A.J. Brown had plenty of success during the practice. Brown reportedly made several receptions against Philadelphia's defense and found opportunities against the Eagles' zone coverage. But that should not erase everything positive from the practice. One of the most encouraging defensive moments came when Quinyon Mitchell matched up with Brown. Mitchell stayed with him, maintained inside leverage, and used his closing speed to force an incompletion. It was a physical rep, and both players were involved in the contact, but Mitchell's technique and recovery ability stood out. Brown still had a productive day, and Philadelphia's secondary will have to perform better in the next practice. But the Eagles should not suddenly panic because a talented wide receiver had success during a joint practice. The bigger question is what Philadelphia learned from the experience. The Patriots exposed some things that need to be cleaned up. The Eagles had turnovers. The pass protection was inconsistent. The secondary gave up too many wins. And when Philadelphia got the final opportunity of practice, Hurts and the offense were unable to finish with points. But this was not a disaster. If anything, it looked like a team going through exactly what you would expect from an offense learning a brand new system against legitimate competition for the first time. There will be mistakes, there will be growing pains, there will be turnovers. What matters is whether the Eagles are also producing enough positive plays to show that the new system is taking shape. And against New England, they did. The Eagles may not have won the day outright, but Jalen Hurts made explosive plays. The running game bounced back. Saquon Barkley looked dangerous in the new concepts. And the offense showed that it can create opportunities even without several of its most important weapons. That is why this practice feels more like a B+ than a failure. Philadelphia still has plenty to improve before the regular season, and nobody should pretend this offense is a finished product. But if the first real test of this new look unit was supposed to tell us whether there are reasons to believe, the answer from Foxborough is yes. Now the big question is whether the Eagles can take what they learned from this first joint practice and come back even stronger in the next one. Do you think Jalen Hurts and the Eagles offense actually passed their first major test against New England, or are the 3 interceptions and the struggles in other areas still enough to make you concerned about this new offense? And that is where the second part of this story becomes especially interesting, because the Eagles now have a very clear list of things they need to clean up. The first joint practice showed that this offense can create explosive plays, but it also showed that Philadelphia cannot afford to waste opportunities when the competition gets tougher. The biggest thing I want to see is more consistency from Jalen Hurts and the passing game. The explosive throws were encouraging, but the Eagles cannot rely on a few spectacular plays to carry an entire offense. The new system under Sean Mannion is still developing, and Hurts is still building chemistry with receivers who have not necessarily been his primary targets throughout the offseason. That process takes time, but what makes the situation interesting is that Hurts did not look overwhelmed by the challenge. He was facing pressure, he was seeing different defensive looks, he was working without several of the weapons Philadelphia expects to have available during the regular season. And even with all of that going on, he continued to create plays outside of structure. That is something Eagles fans should pay attention to. For years, one of the biggest questions surrounding Hurts was how he would respond when defenses created pressure and forced him to make decisions quickly. Against New England, we saw several examples of him recognizing pressure, escaping the pocket, and still delivering accurate throws downfield. That does not mean every problem has suddenly disappeared. It simply means the quarterback is showing signs of growth in an offense that is asking him to do things differently. And then you have Saquon Barkley. If there was one player whose performance could quietly become one of the biggest stories of this entire training camp, it may be Barkley. The Eagles need him to be a central part of this offense, and the early signs from this practice suggest the new scheme could give him more opportunities to play in space. That is extremely important. Barkley does not need to touch the football 25 times every game to be dangerous. What Philadelphia needs is to put him in situations where one missed tackle can completely change a possession. Outside zone runs can stretch a defense horizontally, force defenders to move toward the sideline, and potentially create the space Barkley needs to accelerate through the second level. And Philadelphia appears to be thinking about more than just traditional handoffs. The screen game and receiving concepts could become a major part of Barkley's role. If defenders begin expecting the Eagles to run the ball every time Barkley lines up in the backfield, Philadelphia can punish them by getting him into space as a receiver. That is where this offense could become much more difficult to defend. Imagine having Hurts as a legitimate rushing threat, Barkley attacking the edge, an offensive line capable of winning at the line of scrimmage, and then adding a passing game designed to take advantage of the defensive reactions created by that running threat. That is the formula Philadelphia has to build. And there is another reason the Eagles should feel encouraged by what happened against New England. The offensive line showed some very positive signs. The first-team offensive linemen reportedly had strong performances in their one-on-one matchups, including Cam Jurgens against former Eagles defensive tackle Milton Williams. Jordan Mailata also won his rep, and the Eagles were able to establish themselves physically in those individual battles. That matters because the offensive line is still the foundation of everything this team wants to do. If the Eagles can consistently win up front, it makes life easier for everybody else. It gives Barkley opportunities. It gives Hurts cleaner pockets. It makes the play-action game more dangerous. And it allows the offense to dictate the tempo instead of constantly reacting to the defense. Of course, the Patriots also exposed weaknesses. The Eagles' secondary did not have its best day, and A.J. Brown was able to make plays. That is something the defense will want to correct, but there was also a very encouraging counterpoint in the defensive line. Philadelphia's pass rush was disruptive, with Jalex Hunt standing